Hello and welcome to the France 24 debate. And if you're just joining us now, I'm Annette Young, filling in for François Picard. And in what used to be one of Latin America's wealthiest countries, the beleaguered nation of Venezuela is now facing US-imposed sanctions. This as the country's opposition has launched a two-day strike, increasing pressure on President Nicolas Maduro to scrap plans for a controversial new Congress. In the meantime, at least 3 people have been killed in the last 24 hours as protests continue across the country. Josh Vardy takes a look at the latest developments, including the sanctions imposed by Donald Trump.
An intensifying showdown over the Venezuelan constitution as the country enters its second day of a general strike. Street protests have frequently boiled over into violence, and the tally of the dead continues to grow. Police supporting Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro have been causing serious injury with their use of tear gas, ball bearings and marbles on protesters angry with proposed changes to the constitution. This Sunday, controversial elections are due to vote on a constituent assembly who will go on to rewrite the constitution. The opposition says it's a power grab by Maduro to keep his leftist government in power. They say they will continue to increase pressure before the weekend's vote.
We hope that something happens and the vote doesn't take place. The Constituent Assembly will destroy life, and if that happens, more Venezuelans will have to leave the country, because this will turn into a civil war, and we don't want that in the 21st century.
Meanwhile, the US has announced it will widen sanctions on the country over the ongoing political arrest. The US Treasury has announced a list of 13 current and former Venezuelan officials who are to have their US assets frozen. Nicolas Maduro says the US is responsible for fomenting dissent in Venezuela along with opposition conservative groups. But with food and energy shortages, hundreds pouring over the border into neighboring Colombia, and an estimated 70% of the population against constitutional reform, it will take more than blame to tackle Venezuela's ongoing crisis.
So with the situation deteriorating rapidly in Venezuela, has the country passed the point of no return? Here to discuss this with me are Margarita Cadenas, a Venezuelan documentary maker, Georgi Kuzmanovic, a spokesman on international affairs for the Jean-Luc Mélenchon's far-left party here in France, known as France Unbowed, Rodrigo Diamante, president of the NGO A World Without Gag, and Alexander Main, a Latin American specialist from the International Policy at the Centre for Economic and Policy Research. Margarita, let me start with you. Do you think these Washington sanctions are going to achieve, if anything, or are they actually going to sort of work against the Americans and, if anything, play into the hands of Nicolas Maduro?
Okay, well, the sanctions that normally I know is the sanction about politicians or people that are in the government that their account were frozen. I think if we talk about the sanctions that Trump amenazó, how would you say? Threatened. I think it's not very good for the country, and I don't agree that is something that has to be done, because that is going to put the situation worse in Venezuela. That is going to happen.
Rodrigo?
Well, we have to remind that the first time that this regime has suffered any type of cost by killing innocent people, by destroying the democracy of my country, is through the sanction that Obama approved to sanction 10 members of the government that were related to narcotraffic. Then, a few months ago, the vice president they demonstrated they were related with narcotraffic. The vice president of the country is related and is working with the narco traffic dealers. So imagine a country in Latin America that the government are the people that are committing the crimes, and these are, of course, these have to be sanctioned not only by the U.S. They have to be sanctioned by Europe.
But I want to ask the other two panellists, do you think, Alexander, that these sanctions are going to play into Nicolas Maduro's hands or will indeed be effective?
Well, you were asking at the beginning whether we think things will be, pushed beyond a point of no return. And I think that's exactly what these sanctions could end up doing, because what they've done in the past, and there were sanctions under the Obama administration, and what they're doing now is contributing to the polarization, really hardening the positions of government officials. It's a strategy, I think, from the U.S. to try to essentially isolate the Venezuelan government internationally. And what Venezuela desperately needs right now is dialogue between the two camps. The country is terribly divided. And there were some first hopeful efforts that were made where it's a first step, but Leopoldo Lopez, an opposition leader, who's considered a political prisoner by the opposition in Venezuela, was released from jail to house arrest. So he's still under house arrest, but he has a great deal more freedom, certainly, to meet with who he likes and so on, and to be, again, a political actor. This was thanks to some dialogue that occurred with the former president of Spain, Zapatero. And this gives us an idea of the positive direction things could go in, but instead Venezuela is being sanctioned by the U.S.
I want to talk about those back-channel discussions in a moment, but Georgie, I just want to ask you, you support Nicolas Maduro from what I've heard, but you live in a country, France, which is stable, where there's no food shortages, where there's not rampant inflation, where there's no power outages. Can you understand the anger of those people in Venezuela against the country's president?
First of all, I would like to remind, as I do it every time here, we are not far left party. We are a left party, and that will be enough. Secondly, we consider that the people should have the right to decide by its own what kind of government he wants. He did it many times in Venezuela, voting for Chavez in very democratic elections, and this country is not a dictatorship. And regarding about democracy destroyed in South America, we have many examples of destroyed democracy that have been destroyed because of the involvement of the United States. And if the people of Venezuela want to change the regime, fine. They have election and they can do it. What we don't want is involvement of the United States in any possible way.
Yeah.
Margarita.
Yeah, I would like. It's not the involvement of the United States, and I don't think, well, anyway, part of the country is not asking for the involvement of the United States. It's like having, as we have, for instance, la Communauté Européenne,
The European Union.
The European Union, to have countries that give the alert that what is happening in Venezuela, you say that is not a dictature. Of course, there were elections, but the situation now is a dictature.
Dictatorship.
Dictatorship, thank you, help me. It's a dictatorship because we have a lot of repression. We have 300 or maybe 400 now, 379 political prisoners in jail or house arrest. We have a real censorship in Venezuela. We have many, many reasons to think that a dictatorship is in place. And you can see what is happening now is why these people is on the street, why Venezuelans don't want to have this assembly constitution. Constitution?
Constitutional.
Constitution.
Well, it's very important what she's saying at the end. The changing of the constitution is a complete fraud. Our constitution declares that to change the constitution, you first have to submit it to referendum. It's just like Brexit happening without asking first the people want it or not. The president just decide without asking the people and following the constitution that they want to eliminate the constitution, and they're going to be an election that is not a direct vote, because just half of the votes are going to be elected by them, the other are separated in a way that even the opposition have right now around the 80% of popularity. And with this system, we will have less than 25%. So it's a system completely corrupted, and it's not following what the Constitution says. And it's pretending to eliminate the parliament, all the separation of power. Why the separation of power? Well, because what is happening right now is a tragedy that even people that were with Chavez for the last 15 years, like Luis Ortega, as the general attorney, have been fighting against this craziness of destroying what is left of our democracy that, of course, Chavez wanted to destroy it because it's not he was just following a Cuban ideal of a new type of regime to stay in power forever and not respect democracy and human rights.
So he did 14-time free election that were saluted even by the Jimmy Carter Center for Democracy.
Georgie,
if I remember well.
Georgie, at this point, let me just talk to Alexander. The most important element in all this is the military. And for the moment, they are on the side of Nicolas Maduro. Do you think that is likely to change?
I think, the military has been against the Bolivarian government in the past. I mean, certainly in 2002, a significant part of the military rebelled against the government. There was a coup d'etat, of course, that was supported by the United States government. Today, it's very hard to see. I mean, this is not obviously a transparent institution. The military isn't a transparent institution in any country. But again, I think that the U.S. tactic just now, unfortunately hand in hand with some of the more radical elements of the opposition, is to try to create a sort of climate of instability, destabilization, to try to bring about an internal military intervention, or perhaps even an international, a foreign military intervention. This is the tactic of the guarimba that was practiced in as early as 2004. It was practiced again in 2014. It's a section of the protests. I'm not saying that all the protests are violent, but you have a small section that uses violence as a tactic to try to create a certain amount of chaos and to try to provoke an intervention.
And this is something I want to talk to the two of you, because this has been criticism levelled at some of the protesters. It's almost verging on anarchy at some point, isn't it?
Well, but the thing is that, I don't know, maybe you are reason. I don't know. I'm no politician and no specialized. I'm Venezuelan. I observe my country. And I cannot believe that all the people in Venezuela are like see a plan or a organization, the state come and go out. I have my family there. I have all my family. And all my family, they are suffering since years, about 2 years, we could say, the lack of food, the lack of medicine. That is what about my documentary. How the real life, the Venezuelan suffer because the crisis, the humanitarian crisis in Venezuela is terrible. And the system is destroyed.
Rodrigo?
Yes, I want to tell my own story. 3 years ago, I created a campaign called SOS Venezuela because of the killing of innocent people on the streets. And the government, because of that, they put me in prison. They raided our office, and thanks to international community and United Nations, because I work as a human rights, they released me. At the end, they prohibited me to leave the country for the next 3 years. That is also illegal. Even the judge asked me for sorry, because he told me that he was following orders. He couldn't do anything because he was worried for his family. At the end, I suffered a kidnap. And we get information that maybe the government was inside. And I said, this is just too much. And I decided to escape from the country. This is the reality of thousands of people that have left for political reasons.
I think it's somewhere in the order of 2 million people have left the country.
More.
before Chavez, 30,000 people of Venezuela were registered outside. More, we have between 2 million and more of people because people are desperate because there is a chaos. But beyond that, when I was in prison, my friends are still in prison there. People that used to work with me, we have more than 400 political prisoners that have been tortured. People being electrocutized, raped, electrocuted. They put bags with excrement in their heads. And Amnesty have all this information, have published all this. And that's why we don't understand why there's so much silence from governments in the region, but also in Europe. And we have received a lot of support from the European Parliament, but we need just more than just declaration. We need real sanctions not to the country, but to the people that are in charge of the dictatorship.
Okay, we're going to talk about what needs to be done in terms of the international community after a break. Do stay with us here on France 24 for the second part of our debate. I'll be back after a short break. Hello and welcome back to the second part of the France 24 debate. I'm Annette Young, filling in for François Picard, who's on a much-needed summer holiday. And in what used to be one of Latin America's wealthiest nations, the beleaguered country of Venezuela is now facing US-imposed sanctions. This as the country's opposition launched a 2-day strike, increasing pressure on President Nicolas Maduro to scrap plans for a controversial new Congress. At least 3 people have been killed in the last 24 hours as protests continue across the country. So with the situation deteriorating rapidly in Venezuela, has the country passed the point of no return? Here to answer this with me is Margarita Cadenas, a Venezuelan documentary filmmaker, Georgi Kuzmanovic, a spokesman on international affairs for the Jean-Luc Mélenchon's party France Unbowed, Rodrigo Diamenti, the president of the NGO A World Without Gag, and Alexander Main, a Latin American specialist at the Centre for Economic and Policy Research. Margarita, before the break, we were talking about these sanctions. One of the US officials has warned that these sanctions towards targeting these officials are just the first round of what is being proposed and that they are looking at tougher measures. The most serious option is financial sanctions, and that would halt dollar payments for the country's oil or a total ban on oil imports to the US, a top cash-paying client.
That is going to be terrible.
And that is what I'm going to ask you. I imagine that would be extraordinarily tough.
I think that is going to be terrible because the country already is in a very, very difficult situation. Imagine if we don't have the money, what is going to happen? Because I think that in Venezuela, the only cash money that we are getting is the money from the United States, because China loaned money to Venezuela, and Venezuela is paying with oil, and we are not getting money from it.
Rodrigo, given what you were saying beforehand and the need for the international community to get involved, is this the way to go? I mean, what for you would be the ideal way for the international community to apply pressure?
So right now, the sanctions have to be very smart because you don't want to bring more pain to the people that are already suffering. Venezuela has 95% of medicine are missing. We have the highest rate of infant mortality in the world. With Caracas, the most dangerous city in the world. So where people are the average of people have lost more than 10 kilos in the last year. They're already suffering, and the sanctions have to be very smart. For example, if they wanted to exchange food for oil, that's a good idea, because what is happening right now is that the money is not arriving to the people. People are dying because the money is in the militaries, in the little groups of the government that have been in power for almost 20 years, and it's not arriving. That's why people are dying and eating food on the streets. So we need sanctions very smart that can make the pressure on the dictatorship that they will understand that they can't continue with this dictatorship. They have to open, they have to call for elections. The people that support elections in the past, well, we want to see the elections right now. Why don't make an election now? That's our demand. And also stop the killing. Not only 3 people in the last days. It's more than 100 people that have died being killed. Friend of mine that have been killed. The brother of my friend being killed just protesting in a street.
No, it's not only those killed. We have 30,000 people dying every year because of delinquency. Homicides.
Georgie, you're hearing there from 2 Venezuelans. You're not hearing about a stable country. You're hearing about a country clearly in crisis. What do you say to people like Rodrigo and Margarita?
Well, first, I don't know them, and I know that there is at least 1/4 of the Venezuelan population that is still supporting Maduro, which is even far more than the people that have elected our president in France. This is just for the joke. But regarding the question you asked, right now the United States are already blocking the access somehow, the access to the financial market to the Venezuelan government. So they have shortage of money already, without having the official sanctions. So this is a problem, and this is an involvement. And as my colleague here said, it's a polarization of the positions that can only bring to more despair and more war. And that's the problem, once again, of the American involvement. I would like here to say, as I said, another place, Mrs., is that we're speaking of Venezuela, but we're not speaking of Honduras. This is very interesting. In the last Honduras, in 2009, there was a coup there supported by the United States, and they removed the President Zelaya. And right now, regarding Amnesty International, they're saying it's the worst country regarding human rights. And you have a lot of problems in Venezuela, but they're first. And no word here, no mediatic report, no nothing. So that's very interesting.
Give us a statistic to say that it's worse. We're talking in the last 3 years, 8,000 people have been detained in Venezuela.
Yes.
8,000.
Everybody
That's not even the 10% of what happened in
Sorry, Mister, I didn't cut you.
Let's start with the numbers.
Everybody can check the Amnesty report. It's on internet. It's not complicated to check it. It's not my words. And there is a record of American involvement in Latin America. It was 2009 Honduras. I have to remind one is Chile, 73. We have a lot between those two. And in Chile, what happened is that the first attack before the attack on the Moneda was done 2 months before the actual coup. And there was a general strike. Exactly what is repeating right now, because you have to remember that in June 2017, so 2 months ago, there was an attack from militaries that took an helicopter and attacked the Ministry of Interior and the Ministry of Justice.
Georgie, at this
which
point,
is very.
I'm sorry to cut you off, but what I want to talk about is what's happening in Venezuela. We're not here to actually have a historical lesson on the region as such. I want to talk about what's actually happening here now, and the fact is that you have a population of 30 million people, 2 million of which have fled. You've got extraordinary food shortages to the point that they've lost somewhere in the order, I think, of about 10 kilos in the last 2 years. I mean, nobody can dispute that the country is going through massive crisis. Alexander, can I just bring you in at this point? Not willing to give in to the opposition's demand for early elections, President Maduro has decided to go ahead and announce the creation of a constituent assembly, having problems with that word. Where does this leave, though, the opposition in terms of this vote on Sunday? Because, as Rodrigo pointed out, it's not truly a general vote as such. Could you just explain to us what actually is going to happen on Sunday?
Okay, but if you'll allow me to clarify just a couple of points. First of all, the Constituent Assembly is not a dictatorial move. It's something that's allowed under the Constitution. Afterwards,
not allowed in the
there's an interpretation.
It's not allowed in the Constitution without a previous referendum that is not happening.
But in any case,
doing something that is not in the
Constitution.
What is definitely not constitutional is early elections. You can't have that at this point. That cannot occur under the current Constitution. Nor is the Constituent Assembly, I think, being seen as a replacement for elections. And in fact, President Maduro, and I guess we have to take him at his word at this point, has said that regional elections will take place this year, the presidential elections will take place on schedule next year. And I think that's a very important point to respect the constitutional mandate of the president, something that the opposition has had a very hard time doing over the years, for about 16 years now. But in terms of the internal crisis, there's no doubt that there's a massive internal crisis. It has to do with the fall of oil prices. It also has to do with a great deal of economic mismanagement by the government. There's corruption as well, but I would say that the real essential thing, and I think most economists agree on this, is the completely dysfunctional foreign exchange system, which doesn't allow the sort of capital flow of foreign exchange that you would need for a healthy economy at this point. So this is a big part of the problem, but here again, the opposition has not always played a helpful role. In late 2013, Nicolas Maduro, basically opened his doors to the opposition. He met with governors of the opposition in the presidential palace to discuss the economy and to try to resolve the issues. A very short time after that, radical elements from within the opposition began protests. And ever since then, I would say there has not been the dialogue that is needed, a dialogue that was begun in late 2013 and that we need to start again.
So how can that dialogue be achieved, in your opinion?
It can't be achieved by sanctions. I think that's certain, and that's definitely going to polarize the situation more. It can be achieved by allowing the actors that have been involved so far, including Pope Francis, including former President Zapatero from Spain, and others, to be involved in this process, but also to put pressure on both sides. I think both sides need to be pressured. At this point, there are opposition protests that are quite violent. This has never been denounced by any of the leadership of the opposition, and that needs to start happening.
That's what I want to talk to the two of you about, because this is a common theme when I was reading up in terms of researching for this evening's debate. And one thing was, theme that emerged all the time in terms of criticism levelled towards the opposition is the fact there is no one single leader as such, and that the protests have been extremely violent and as a result counterproductive.
Well, okay. First thing, the opposition extremely violent is a response, because at the beginning, this manifestation, all the people on the street weren't violent. They came out with stones, and they have the answer was gas, was
bullet, plastic bullet, tear gas.
And the thing is that that was crescendo. All this violence increasing. That was increasing, but it's not at the beginning. And even though not so long ago, about 15 days ago, the opposition made some manifestation, people on the street protests with nothing. They went out just with candles, and that's it. And they have repression.
The best way to understand the difference of the two sides, there is not even one, and you can try to find it. One declaration of a leader of opposition calling to the use of violence. Actually, they have declared all the time that they are against of violence. And if a protest, the only way to protest is non-violent. And if they protest through other way, it's not with us. Of course, after many days, people being killed every day, we're talking more than 100 people, some persons, because not only because of that, because also they are having problems to find food, are finding ways to protest other ways, like throwing rocks, and sometimes they're used like Molotov. But you will never hear that call from the opposition. But if you hear the government that have to be, I want to hear what you think. He said, what is not going to be defended through a vote, we're going to defend it to the bullets and arms. I want to hear what you think about that, and the audience what they think. We have more than 15 declarations of the vice president of the political party of the regime saying that they're going to use the use of force. They have armed groups, and they have to say that they have to defend by all means, and using the force is one of them to support the revolution. Try to find something like that in the opposition side. Okay. We will never hear, because we never have called for, we can't ask for democracy using anti-democratic methods. We can ask for human rights if you are anti-democratic. And what is happening is because there is 99% of injustice. People are desperate of what is happening. No one hears us. Not even the international community is hearing us enough. And they are not saying enough to stop the tragedy. And this is why we are in front of a civil war. Because when people are not here and they don't have food and are desperate, how do you want them to survive?
I think we're on the verge of a civil war because there's intransigence on both sides. I think that's very clear at this point. They've really hardened their positions. And again, for 3 years, there's basically been no conversation between both sides. And we've reached a stage where I think it's quite clear what's going on in Venezuela. I think I would agree with Georgie about the point that the media sort of provides a lot more coverage of the human rights abuses, and there are human rights abuses, and I don't cast any doubt over your account that are taking place in Venezuela, but there are also human rights abuses elsewhere. So I think the public is pretty well informed, and I think also the public has an image of the Venezuelan government being a completely rogue government, again, a dictatorship. It is an elected government. Again, the problem with sectors of the opposition is that they've refused from the start to recognize the legitimacy of the president. So
and that's
a bad starting point for any kind of discussion.
That's a big problem, because basically the opposition has boycotted this Sunday's vote, but Maduro is insisting that this is the way forward to peace. Is Maduro actually listening to anybody at all, given that you do have such polarised views?
Well, I'm not in Maduro's head, but I'm aware that just a few days ago, he has tried to get the opposition to participate in this. And again, if we take him at his word, I think he was in a position where he'd been constantly defensive after so many protests. He wanted to be more proactive in the situation. He wanted to have a positive agenda. He saw this constituyente as a positive agenda that continued.
That's a lie.
How
doing something illegal? Okay, I want to hear your story. It's inconstitutional. They're going to eliminate you're talking about votes and elections. Well, the last election was the election of the Congress that we won, more than majority, and they want to eliminate, with this process that is constitutional, the parliament. I want to see you to defend President of the United States eliminating the Congress of the United States, and I want to see you in that chair defending that position. You will not do it, and you know that.
And the opposition...
Or the Prime Minister or President of France eliminating the National Assembly.
He just did it.
I want to see you also here defending that's the best thing.
Rodrigo?
No, but the only thing is, you are saying that he tried to call the opposition and everything. When he said to the Venezuelan, to the people, the opposition, saying, if I don't win with votes, I will win with arms. What sort of let's say, trying to have a dialogue?
I don't agree with that statement, obviously, and I have a lot of criticism of the government. However, there is a little bit more context to that statement, I believe, anyway, which is that he was discussing a situation where Chavismo, Nicolas Maduro, won with a legitimate vote, and if he were forced out of power illegitimately, then he would
No,
He
that
said,
wasn't the
if we can win through votes, we will win through arms. If we can't win through votes, we will win with the arms. If we can't. He's not saying like if they made a coup d'etat. No, if the votes, we don't have the votes,
again,
that's not a problem. We will use the arms.
When I saw the rest of the statement, that was not my interpretation.
Rodrigo, Margarita,
That was not my interpretation.
I know that you have obviously things to say, but equally there are other people at this table who need to be listened to. Please finish, Alexandra, and then Georgie, you want to weigh in.
Well, I don't think I have much to add except for the fact that I think it's very important to see where these sanctions that have been announced from President Trump are coming from. They're not really coming from President Trump. They're coming from a senator from Florida, a Republican senator called Marco Rubio, who I really characterize as an extremist, certainly on Latin American issues. He's someone who's been very opposed to any sort of openness with Cuba. He is a strict defender of the embargo against Cuba, and it seems very clear at this point that he and a few other members of Congress of the United States have a similar vision, which is to push for a Cubanization of Venezuela by a system of embargo. This is what he sees as the right political future, and I think it's very dangerous that he has so much control over foreign policy.
Georgie, I just want to ask you, what about the neighbouring countries? What about the region as such? How much input can they have in rescuing Venezuela from the brink?
Well, I'm not a specialist of this question, and I would like to come back on what was said regarding the help. At least regarding the help of the countries that are around, I know that the opposition asked of the support of Brazil. The government just changed not a long time ago with the support, once again, there of the United States. What I would like to say is that we are speaking about democracy, but as Mr. Main explained it, this opposition has a problem since Hugo Chavez is winning elections. In democracy, you have to accept that you have lost your election, you wait the next ones, as we are doing here, but you don't. And that's a big problem because all the rest that are organized, since the Guarimbas in 2014, in 2004, the coup in 2002, maybe you will win. But
Georgie,
you will create an opposition against you that will understand that you do not respect at all
Georgie,
democracy.
okay, very quickly, because we have a minute left, and I really mean a minute left. And very quickly, I want to ask each of you, in one sentence, what is the future for your country?
The future of our country will not only depend on Venezuelans, will also depend on the international community. If they want to help us, we need it because they are killing us. And people are dying because they are willing to keep everything because they have lost everything.
Margarita?
Uncertain. How would you say that?
Uncertainty.
Uncertainty.
Alexander?
Well, I'll just repeat the points that I've made, which are that for there to be a possibility of a positive future in Venezuela, you absolutely need dialogue, and sanctions are going to undermine any process of dialogue.
Georgie, very quickly.
International dialogue and not involvement of any country willing to destabilize this country.
I want to thank all of my guests for an extremely lively and also very moving debate. And it's time now for Media Watch. And Emma James has been taking a look at the story that's still dominating online and in the media, and that, of course, is Donald Trump's proposed ban on transgender people in the military.
Yes, it is still a huge talking point online and in the media too. One thing that I think is probably worth looking at is the front page of today's New York Daily News, which has dubbed Donald Trump to be the commander in hate. They point out, or they claim, that his cruel betrayal is built on lies. Obviously, he talked about the cost and the disruption caused by having transgender people in the military. It's something that's been debunked fairly widely, and certainly the New York Daily News is in agreement with those people who have debunked that. There have been many enlightening and important responses too, not least from those who have served in the military and who are transgender. Kristen Beck posted this message in response to Donald Trump, saying, "You just opened a can of whoop ass. Meet me and tell me I'm not worthy to my face." My guess is that Donald Trump will not take her up on that offer. Now, this is Kristen Beck as she looks now. She was a Navy SEAL for 20 years. She came out as a transgender woman in 2013. And what she has said is that she doesn't want anything extra, just what everyone else has, dignity and respect and the chance to serve my country. And as you can see in that photograph there, among her many honours that she's received during her career, she's got a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star with Valour. So really her words are extremely important, and her words are, being transgender doesn't affect anyone else. Looking elsewhere, other reactions to this, because there have been a lot of criticisms that we shouldn't listen to Kristen Beck because she's no longer serving. Well, this gentleman is serving in the US Air Force, Staff Sergeant Logan Ireland. And what he says is, you are not going to deny me my right to serve my country when I'm fully qualified and able and willing to give my life. Now, if you don't understand what all the fuss is about in terms of this row, or perhaps feel that transgender people don't have a place in the military, this is an article that is very well worth reading in Rolling Stone. They've interviewed Shane Ortega, who was the very first serving openly transgender soldier in the US Army. He's now retired, but what he says is he's very worried about the kind of precedent that this could set. He says if you can enforce a discriminatory ban against what America likes to idealise as the pinnacle of being an American, what does that mean for the regular Joe? He claims it's about deflecting attention away from what he refers to as an incompetent president. He also says that this is so much more than people needing jobs or serving or war. This is about who is considered a valid human being and who gets to decide. Now, all the late night topical shows, of course, as usual, were addressing this issue last night with many jokes, many barbed comments, all the usual people responding. But perhaps one of the most interesting appearances came on the Jimmy Fallon show, and it was a comedienne who is a transgender woman. Take a look at what she had to say.
Now, I don't necessarily want to serve in the military, but I want the right to serve. You know, it's like, I don't want to go to your baby shower, but I want the invite. And I get it. If you constantly draw attention to yourself, spend all day distracting everyone, and cost taxpayers millions of dollars, the perfect job for you isn't the military, it's the President of the United States.
So there you go. And just to confirm, she is a transgender woman, because I had to look twice and actually double-checked, because you would never know. One last word on this. Stephen Colbert, of course, the very famous US comedian, actually fixed one of Donald Trump's old tweets to make it fit in more with his kind of current line of thinking on the lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender community. And he's changed it to the LGBT community, I will fight you.
OK, thanks for that, Emma. And once again, humour proving that it's sometimes the best way to make a stand. And that's it for this edition. My colleague Laure will be back at the top of the hour with more news and headlines. Do stay with us here on France 24.